Hello again, fight fans. I am Jason Burgos for Sherdog.com, and today I am joined by the lead voice for the Professional Fighters League. However, he is also a UFC and PFL veteran and co-host on Sirius XM's Pac-12 Today, and of course, the 2018 PFL Light Heavyweight Champion millionaire. He is the real OC. He is Sean O'Connell. Sean, thanks for some time today to talk some PFL.
Yeah, let's talk about it. Thanks for having me.
Now, I definitely want to get to PFL, championship related stuff. But I wanted to get into PFLU related stuff because before we, I want to talk about what a story I feel was something not covered enough in MMA media circles this year, and that was your transition to play-by-play work for the PFL. Now, the move wasn't a complete shock because you've done a good bit of media work, like the Sirius show I mentioned. You did color commentary for them last season. But how did how did taking over the job actually come together? Because Todd Harris was pretty solid in the role last year. Was this something that was talked about after last year? Was it closer to season 2? How did this all come together?
Well, I actually did play-by-play for them last year on preliminary fights.
Okay.
I just when I was in the UFC, I was kind of always asking for media opportunities, but I wasn't either talking to the right people or more likely I wasn't making enough noise as a fighter, right?
Okay.
So they put famous people on the desk. They put famous people on the analyst roles, and I always wanted to do some of that analyst work, but it just wasn't coming to fruition. So I said, well, you know what? I have media chops that basically no other fighter has. So maybe a better role for me would be play-by-play.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously the competition there is not the same, right? Yeah. And I have no problem with that. The fact that, it's me versus Randy Couture for an analyst role, or Bas Rutten, or, Daniel Cormier, or whatever. Like, I wouldn't pick me either. So I was like, you know what? Let me try this play-by-play stuff. And thankfully, the PFL, gave me a shot doing the early fights on the cards last year. And Todd was gracious in allowing that to happen. He's a real pro. He helped mentor me through that process. And then, he's an NBC employee, and we made the switch to ESPN this year.
Okay.
So it created an opportunity for me in the PFL. And, thankfully they thought I had done a good enough job in season 1 that they could take a chance on me in season 2. And hopefully it was a success. I had a lot of fun doing it.
For the folks at home and that end up watching, explain to them the difference in doing play-by-play compared to color commentary, because it's a big difference. Some may think all TV work is the same, but with play-by-play, I'm sure the research is different, but most of all, you are in the position kind of like a point guard. You got to lead the broadcast. You got to set up your colleagues. How much harder is it to do that than, just looking pretty and making some good points from time to time?
Well, I mean, they're both very challenging. To be good at either of them, I think, is pretty challenging. They are significantly different. And the play-by-play role is one that typically is not held down by someone who is a former athlete.
Exactly.
I think,
very true.
If you watch basketball, football, baseball, and MMA, any sport, typically it is a broadcast professional who's trained in media, who's gone through that process of being an intern and then doing like AAA farm league baseball games and single A, whatever. And they work their way up to the point where they get to do some play-by-play for the big leagues. And then, the analyst roles are typically well-spoken and accomplished athletes who you just lean on them to give you perspective on what you're watching. But the play-by-play's job is to describe what's being seen on the screen, to, as you said, I play that point guard role of kind of distributing and allowing the analysts to make the proper points. And it's just a completely unique animal. I think that it is helpful to have play-by-play voices that have deep knowledge of the sports that they're calling, because it allows the analysts to, focus on the right things instead of having to kind of steer back to a point that actually matters or something like that. But, it's all a process that I'm still learning. And I very much admire the great play-by-play voices in football, baseball, basketball, and even in our sport, where that relationship is not quite so clearly defined in MMA, right? I mean, the biggest broadcast, the most iconic broadcasts in MMA have always been the UFC broadcasts, and there hasn't been a super clear delineation of the roles of who's talking when. Whereas if you're watching a football game, right, no matter what happens during that touchdown pass, the play-by-play man is telling you ball's in the air, Randy Moss goes up, and it's a catch. And then it's the analyst's turn, right? Well, in MMA, and to a lesser extent in boxing, you have everybody talking at once. So it's slightly different in our sport, but it's a complex relationship, and hopefully one that we're figuring out in the PFL.
And I want to ask about the figuring out part, because it's you said, it's completely uncommon. You don't have the athletes in that position, and I can see that being the easy part for a play-by-play guy that isn't an athlete in that sport to be like, so what do you think about this? Is there ever a time, and is it a significantly hard learning curve for you where you know the action, you can make a great point here, but in a way you don't want to step on Randy and Eve's toes, you don't want to do it all by yourself? Is there kind of times where you got to mute yourself a little bit, like, okay, yeah, let them do this kind of stuff, I'm just doing this? Or is it fun for you in that way?
It's fun because for me, like, I really do, I feel like I know what I'm talking about, and I'm very confident I could fill the analyst role successfully. But the nice thing for me, the luxury I have with the PFL is I know that Randy knows more than I do, for sure. And I know that Eve knows more than I do. So even though I feel like I'm very well versed, I have no problem deferring to their knowledge, because both of those guys, like, I'm an experienced guy, I'm a veteran, but those are OGs in the game. So when it's like, I don't mind being Luke Skywalker if that's Obi-Wan and Master Yoda.
Fair enough. Now, for the PFL Championship that went down on New Year's Eve last week, several interesting results and some not so much. I will start right at the top of the card with Kayla Harrison and Larissa Pacheco. I mean, Kayla winning was like a Thanos-level inevitability. We saw it coming months ago. Then the biggest glimmer of upset possibilities was probably Sarah Kaufman. When she was eliminated, I mean, it damn near seemed set in stone. No disrespect to Larissa. That said, were there any elements of the fight that surprised you? Did you expect maybe Larissa to put up more of a resistance the second time? Or were you kind of expecting what happened and maybe even surprised maybe Kayla didn't get a finish that she was hoping for?
Well, I don't know if I was really surprised by anything in that fight. Larissa, she is an excellent fighter, but, it's clear she's the second best 155-pound woman on the PFL roster, and that's not an insult. Kayla is just a different animal as an athlete. Her camp is one of the best in the entire world. So, there was this thought in people's minds, and mine included, that maybe, there's a glimmer of hope for Larissa Pacheco, because in their first bout in the regular season, she took Kayla's back at one point, and there were these moments in that fight where she did some good things, but her progress and Kayla's progress have been pretty different. So, I wasn't overly surprised by that once we saw it play out. Kayla continues to outpace the competition. There's not a 155-pound woman in the world that can beat her right now. Part of that is because there's not a lot of excellent 155-pound women in the world. I'd like to see what she's capable of at 145, or I'd like to see somebody who's had success at 145 come up to 155 to beat her. But it's just kind of the situation we're in. And, a two-time Olympic gold medalist is one of the best athletes in combat sports we have ever seen. So no surprises there.
In terms of a little surprise, I wanted to next go into Emiliano Sordi versus Jordan Johnson. Now, Sordi was like the Ray Cooper of season 2 as he just straight blasted through into the finals. I only call this a bit of a surprise just because Sordi's grappling on paper seemed like it could be a big weakness against Jordan, because Jordan's grinding, grappling, wrestling. But Sordi proved a wrecking machine from beginning to end, really took his name and career to a whole new stratosphere with the win, getting the million, the title. What do you think about how that fight played out, and Sordi's big leap forward from season 1 where he lost to Bozagate, season 2 he beats him twice with revenge? What do you think about the win and his leap forward this season?
Well, I'm incredibly impressed by Emiliano Sordi this year, and I think there were 2 factors that played into it. One, he's healthier this year. He had a shoulder injury that, fighters don't use that as an excuse. Right. But after the fact, he just said, look, I promise season 2 I'm going to be better because I'm not dealing with this shoulder injury anymore. And we were like, okay, we'll see. But also he talked to us about the fact that he's one of these guys that kind of used to get inside of his own head. And he went to a mental coach, a sports psychologist, and worked on some techniques and some visualization. And that really is the thing that flipped the switch for him. And boy, did it, because he was dominant. His season this year, like you said, similar to Ray Cooper's a year ago, similar to Vinny Magliage in the regular season.
Very true.
Every win in 2 minutes, But the difference is that Sorty obviously finished it out in the finals. And look, he's a guy who's got a really well-rounded game. He's got freakish power in both hands, and he's going to be tough to beat for anyone at 205 pounds.
And when I talked to you last year, before your title fight, I enjoyed talking to you just because you were so honest about how, retirement and, it's fine to think about that. What do you think about fighters and getting, sports psychologists and mental coaches, stuff like that? I love it. And the fighters I've talked to, it's been so helpful for them. Do you feel maybe in sports, especially fighting of all things, is there a machismo too much in the sport, and maybe more fighters should seek out stuff like that? Because it is such a stressful industry to be a part of.
Yeah, one of the toughest things for the fight sports, for combat sports, for mixed martial arts, is for people to tell the truth, because media doesn't want to hear it. Fans don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear about your self-doubt. They don't want to hear about your realistic takes on, like, hey, I might be the 10th best person in the world, but that means there's 9 guys that I'd have a really hard time beating. No one wants to hear you say that. People want to hear you say, I'm the best in the world, even if you don't actually believe it and it's not actually true, So self-reflection is one of the toughest things in this sport, and it's not often rewarded. And there's that stigma that you're talking about that's attached because of it. But look, if an Argentine caveman like Emiliano Sordi can buck that trend, then anybody can, because nobody comes from a culture that is more machismo-centric than he does, Yep. And he did a fantastic thing by just saying, like, I need help here. If you have a back problem, you go to a chiropractor.
Yep. Yes.
There's nothing wrong with that. If you got a knee problem, you go to an orthopedic guy. If your muscles are sore all the time, you go to a massage therapist. If you got a problem with your head game, why not go see a sports psychologist or a mental coach? I hope people do it. Not everyone needs that. I mean, I felt like for me, the only thing I had that was elite in the game was my mentality. So I didn't need it, but for guys who do, it could really unlock some tools like it did for Sorty.
Next, I want to get into Natan Schultz versus Loic Radzhabov. Besides the utter torture of Schultz, friends and family right behind us in press row just screaming the whole time, this was the fight of the night, at least for me. Schultz, along with Lance Palmer, has been fantastic through these 2 seasons. Did you expect Loic, of all people, to be the one to really give him his toughest fight with the pressure and really land a lot of shots, and at points was winning this fight?
Yeah, no, I didn't expect that at all, because I thought Loic's constant forward pressure would just lead to him going chest to chest, hip to hip with Schultz, and ended up getting tossed because of it. But one thing we learned about Loic Radzhabov, good wrestling, freakish strength. Like, he's as strong. Yeah. He's as strong as a light heavyweight. He's a guy that he's able to shrug off a lot of things with his pure physicality that other people rely more heavily on technique for. So I was really pleased to see how hard he pushed Natan Schultz, because it proved 2 things. Well, it gave us a really, really fun fight to watch, but it also proved that Schultz can be tested, forced to move backwards, and he can overcome, even in a firefight, he can overcome and implement a strategy. And that's so hard to do, because he was taking heavy punches. Yeah. He was wearing a lot of punishment. He was testing his chin, but he still kept going back to the well. He still kept listening to his coaches with those low kicks, and it proved dividends later in the fight. He showed an incredible amount of toughness and endurance. And if there's anyone who doubts whether or not Natan Schultz is one of the elite lightweights in the world, I really don't know what fights they're watching, because the guy, he just passes every test that gets put in front of him.
Onto the big boys, the heavyweight title. I'd be lying if I didn't admit I was rooting for Jake Rosho. I mean, Jared Roscoe, excuse me. Nothing against Isaev, but I talked to Jared twice this year. Super nice guy, and his story of being a full-time elevator installation apprentice, then doing full-time training. Rinse, repeating that for an entire season. I mean, it's super impressive. I respect that so much. That said, from pretty early on in the fight, it seemed like Ali was bigger, stronger, faster, maybe even more athletic. Like, was that a fight for you that seemed like Ali's to lose just on paper and skills and ability, or did you think Jared really had a really good chance in that?
No, I mean, look, Ali was a favorite for a reason, and I'm not one to just count out the underdogs, obviously, for personal reasons. And look, Rochel's story very dear to me, right? Because that's a guy who's kind of on the last legs of his career. Yep. He's been a journeyman who's had his ups and downs, and he's a working family man. Yes. My entire career, I had day jobs. I never was a full-time fighter. I respect the heck out of people who find a way to balance both. I wanted badly for him to be able to go out on a high note the way that I was able to. Yeah. Excuse me. But look, Ali Isaev is an former Olympian. And people don't realize Ali Isaev got knocked out of that 2008 Olympic wrestling tournament by the eventual gold medalist. Okay. And then that gold medalist was later found to be on steroids. So it's not like Ali Isaev lost in the Olympics to a scrub. When you watch a guy that size throw spinning wheel kicks
yes.
and bouncing around the way he does, he has elite athleticism. Now, look, his skill set in the striking department has a long way to go, but he's undefeated for a reason. He's a very, very unique athlete. I'm not surprised by the results. I would have liked to have seen Rochelt, be able to stay on his feet and implement a little bit more offense, but well-executed game plan by Isaev, and he got the job done.
And I don't want to go back to the Thanos inevitability puns, but the other inevitability on the card was Alex Gilpin and Lance Palmer for a third time. Lance Palmer beating this guy in 7 months, third time. From a fighter's perspective, how difficult was that for both? Lance has not been beaten in the league yet over 2 seasons. He's in his prime. He's looking for the big fights. And he has to try to get up mentally. I know there's a title, but get up mentally to beat a guy a third time in 7 months. He beat twice definitively. And then on Alex's side of it, he's got to get over in the belief that, oh yeah, I can somehow be better in just a few months. And it's not like, oh, he went away for 2 years, grew, had a lot of fights, and then came back to this trilogy or whatever. Was that as an inevitability to you? Did you think Alex Gilpin had a chance to maybe do something different, or after you see a couple of rounds, like it feels like fight 1 and 2 after all over again?
Look, I mean, I love Alex Gilpin. He's a really, really tough guy. But Lance Palmer is on another level. Yeah. Lance Palmer is a top 3 featherweight in the world. He is, and he's getting better. Like you said, he's in his prime. He's in a new camp. His striking's getting a lot stronger. More importantly, his striking defense is getting a lot stronger. Lance Palmer, again, when you talk about the resumes that some of these people have, not only in MMA, but as a 4-time All-American collegiate wrestler, it just means you're a different animal as an athlete, right? And Gilpin is an incredible fighter. He's very well-rounded. He's got a really clever submission game, but there's still a gap between him and Lance Palmer. And that's not an insult. That's not to disparage Alex Gilpin. If you're second best to Lance Palmer, you might still be a top 10 guy in the world. So, he's a really game competitor. And let's not forget, not only did he have to overcome the mental hurdle of already having lost to Lance Palmer twice, but he was eliminated by Lance from the playoffs. He was eliminated by Lance from the PFL season. So not only do you maybe feel like, I can't beat this guy, he's already proven it to me once, but he's the guy who took your opportunity to win the $1 million away, and you only got it back because somebody else refused to fight clean and failed the drug test, right? Those are all mental hurdles you have to overcome. And on the Lance side of things, we talk about this all the time. You hear Randy talk about it on the broadcast if you go back and watch it. In a rematch, in a 3-match, the onus is always on the guy who won the fight. Because why do you need to improve? You've already shown us that you're dominant, that you've beat this guy. So why do you need to keep working hard and improving? But Lance Palmer, with another $1 million on the line and the legacy that he wants to establish in this sport, he handles his training, his preparation as professionally as anybody in the entire world. And he proved to us once again that that's exactly who he is as an athlete. I don't know who's going to beat Lance Palmer at 145, especially if his hands keep getting better.
Yeah. Last but certainly not least, and the fight I was most looking forward to on the show, and it delivered in my mind, Ray Cooper versus David Michaud. The fight was entertaining. And in a way heartbreaking, because in the second there's really seemed to be a momentum shift for David, and he really seemed to be getting it going. Looked like he's taking over the fight and might be going his way to get that million, but one well-placed body shot changed it all, and Cooper got the W. First, should observers of the sport wonder if Michaud, has a Chong Li from Bloodsport weakness to the gut? Because, from 2 losses from the Sadibou, then he gets it to the gut from Ray Cooper, and you're like, damn, again? Or is it coincidental? And also, who did you feel was the favorite going to that fight?
Well, I thought Ray was still the favorite just because, he got to this point last year. He's been a guy that's as explosive as anybody else. But it's a razor thin type favorite mentality for him because he's facing sort of a mirror image of himself.
Yeah.
Good wrestler with power, right? Just a guy who maybe hasn't been on this stage yet at Madison Square Garden, where Ray, he got there and came so close last year that it felt like he paid his dues and he really deserved this one. Not that David Michaud didn't, because he's one of the surprise stories for me this year. Yeah. He's a guy, 17-second loss to that Sadibou liver kick in his PFL debut. As is customary in our sport, you have a loss like that, a lot of people just go ahead and write you off, which is never fair. Mm-hmm. But he battled his way back through really tough fights in the playoff, beating a couple tough veteran guys. John Howard is no joke. He's a very tough out. He was coming off a big win over Ray Cooper before that fight. Glyco França looked unbeatable, and David Michaud just outworked him, right? So he comes into the fight against Ray Cooper. And I'm proud of Ray because he's a guy like myself who just kind of goes out on his sword or out on his shield, right? He's just like, all right, you know what? I'm going to bite down, I'm going to throw, and let the cards fall where they may. And it's not always the best strategy. Very fan-friendly.
Yeah.
We all like to watch it. But it's not, when there's $1 million on the line, it's not always the best idea. So in this one, he did some smart things. He had some successful clinch attacks, which we thought was a part of the game that might favor David Michaud. Started that liver work early with that knee in the first round. And then the difference between Ray Cooper's fight against David Michaud and the one that he was victorious, or the one he lost against John Howard, is in those big firefight exchanges when he got clipped, he immediately went back to his defense, right? He's like, oh, I got hurt. I got to get my hands back up. And against Howard, he was just like, oh, he hurt me. I got to punch him harder than he's punching me, and his defense was cleared out. It's just like those little subtle differences are sometimes the gap between winning and losing. And for Ray Cooper to make that slight adjustment when you get clipped, get your hands back up, it allowed him to survive. And anytime you give yourself an opportunity to unleash the kind of power that he has, you can knock a guy out, even if it's with a liver shot. Yeah. So, Michaud, I talked to him at the after party. He's a great sport about everything. He's a professional. He's awesome. He's like, I don't know what to do because you can't really train the liver. He doesn't abuse his liver. He doesn't drink. He's not a guy who, has a bunch of vices that way. And he's just like you said, does he just have kind of this kryptonite that you can't do a whole lot about? Yeah. Who knows?
Now, I just have a few last PFL-related questions, and this is perfect, too, in terms of, we were just talking about Lance Palmer, how high-level fighter is, one of the best in the world, and it's always important, for organizations that are not the UFC to have those fighters that people can say, hey, they're as good as the UFC level, maybe even better. How important, because I talked to Lance before the championship, and he wasn't re-signed for this season, for this upcoming season yet, but I talked to him at the championship. He said he got it done the night before. He'll be back for season 3. How important is it for the PFL to re-sign a guy of his caliber and not let him go to the UFC and something like that, and have one of those best in the world kind of fighters on the roster?
Well, it's very important for the PFL. It's also important for Lance Palmer, right? Because you're established as a champion, as a brand pillar with the Professional Fighters League. You're making really good money, $2 million now, plus whatever he's getting for his regular season fights. And I know that his negotiations with the PFL were very cordial. He expressed, no, I want to be here, but I deserve the kind of money that some of these other big name signings are getting, like Rory, like Kayla. And I hope he got that, he deserves it. He's a guy that if I'm having a debate with somebody and they're like, oh yeah, the PFL doesn't have the kind of fighters that the UFC does. Look, maybe not top to bottom just yet, But I will bet on Lance Palmer against darn near any 145-pounder on any roster, not just the UFC. You talk about Bellator, you talk about Ryzen, you talk about anywhere else in the world. Find me a list of guys who are favorites over Lance Palmer, and it's a very, very short list. So I'm really excited that he got the deal done. He's a smart guy. He's a consummate professional athlete. He's a super good-looking dude. He can be the face of this company. I mean, there's nothing wrong with Lance Palmer being on the PFL roster. And I know that people, question stylistically whether or not he's the most appealing fighter. He's addressing that. He changed camps so he can be a little bit more Frankie Edgar. And no one ever complains about Frankie Edgar.
Now, speaking of signings, of course, you have to talk about the Rory signing when it comes to the PFL. The biggest free agent signing for the PFL probably yet. I mean, Kayla was a big deal, but she wasn't established in the sport yet. Rory's a champion Bellator, a big star in UFC. How important is that signing? How big of a deal is it? And on this, I talked to Ray, before the playoffs, and he talked to me about the league was trying to sign Cyborg and add her, didn't get her, goes to the Bellator. In a way, I know Cyborg is a GOAT level fighter, but is Rory almost even a bigger signing and even more helpful because of his name recognition, because of the appeal he has with fans on such a big deal? Is this how big is this for the PFL to get a Rory MacDonald?
Rory MacDonald is the biggest signing we've had because of what you're talking about, because you know what to expect not only from Rory, but you kind of know where Rory is in the hierarchy of elite fighters in the world. Yeah. So based on the results of what you see at welterweight in the PFL between Rory and, David Michaud or Ray Cooper III or Sada Boussi or whoever, you can start to kind of figure out, even though MMA math is obviously not perfect, you can start to figure out where some of these other guys stand. And that's important for this roster because fans do compare, and fans do want to validate, okay, Ray Cooper is a beast, but what would happen to Ray Cooper at 170 pounds in Bellator or in the UFC? Well, guess what? You just brought a guy who's a legend in both organizations over, and we're probably going to get to see that now.
Yeah. Now,
and go ahead.
No. That's I didn't want to interrupt. Please continue.
Well, no, and I'm just, Rory is a guy. We talked about this earlier, right? Fans and media, they don't like to hear people tell the truth in the fight game.
Yeah.
Rory has said, look, I need something to give me a spark. I'm not as motivated as I used to be, right? And people, of course, want to write him off because of that. There's a lot of miles on the tires for his age, but this is the spark he was talking about. An organization that's super excited to have him, is paying him really good money, and allows him to fight in a unique regular season playoff with 2 fights in one night and championship format. Rory MacDonald has fought some of the most legendary fights in our sport. He's never fought twice in one night. I talked to him about that. He's never had to overcome that challenge. So it lights another fire under Rory MacDonald that maybe we haven't seen in a couple years. It's an important signing for everyone.
And I'm glad you brought up the 2 fights in one night, because there were some people that had issues with it because there were several instances of a fighter not being able to make it to the semis, and you wondering, are the best fighters making it to the semis and then make it to the finals? But overall, on a general level, going into season 3, final question, what are some of the things you are looking forward to in season 3, and maybe some adjustments, because there was also, a lot of fighters that missed weight. Are there any adjustments the PFL can make? I talked to actually Roxanne Modafferi recently, and she talked about talking to the commission, maybe 1 point, deductions for the first round is something maybe they can push for, or anything. But weight cuts was an issue. Is there anything in general for what is really a really fun format that you would wish or could see you have the idea of good tweaks for in season 3?
Yeah. No, I think I have a couple of good ideas that are not unique just to me. I know there's other people in the organization that might like to explore making these changes. Look, if fighters are going to miss weight, they should lose a point in our standings, I think.
Okay.
Because you get points. You get points for your regular season fights, right? So let's say that you have 6 points, 2 decision wins. Let's say you missed weight in your second fight. All right. Well, now minus a point, not only for that fight. I want minus a point for the season. I want it to affect your seed. I want it to affect your path to the championship. We need to disincentivize people missing weight. And look, I know we eliminated the middleweight division this past year. I'd like to see that come back. I think that we've found evidence that Kayla Harrison is the most dominant 155-pounder. I don't need to see the 155-pound women's division unless we can sign a lot of talent worldwide, unless we can sign people that can actually challenge her. And if we're going to do another 155-pound women's tournament, personally, I would like to see them have to fight twice in one night in order to get to the championship. Yes. If that's the path that everyone has to follow, that's the path that everyone should have to follow. So I'd like to see, that role change a little bit. Kayla has established herself as the champion. I'd be okay with her just kind of having showcase fights until we can build that division up a little bit more and actually test her. So, I mean, these are all things that could be adjusted, but that's the beauty of the Professional Fighters League, is that instead of this organization just kind of resting on the laurels and saying, oh, you know what, we're just gonna throw this $1 million at people and hope that solves all the problems. They are trying to fix what have been industry-wide problems in MMA for a long time. They are trying to provide a new format for athletes and for fans, and they're trying to really change and approach this sport in a different way. And I expect that in season 3 we'll see some more of that, and I hope I'm part of it.
I actually asked Ray Sefo at the post-fight both questions related to middleweight. I asked about middleweight comeback. He said no, which is really unfortunate because Lewis Taylor was a great story, and what's happened with him and not making one welterweight is unfortunate.
Well, look, never mind Lewis Taylor. What about the guy that Lewis Taylor upset in the final?
Yes.
I'd love to see all of these guys come back, but keep going. Yeah.
And then for lightweight, because I feel the same. The women need to have a playoff and expanding the roster. He talked about maybe 12. Do you feel in the way if they don't expand and get to 12, really preferably 16, and do playoffs and 2 fights in one night, does it diminish the entire division? Especially since the champion seems so far away from everybody else. Do they have to have those elements just to give the champion a challenge at least?
Yes, absolutely. And look, I'm a man. I feel like I'm a company man for the PFL right now. I love Professional Fighters League. So, but I'm not telling tales out of school, saying things like we need to be better. We need to be better at heavyweight, or we need to get rid of the division. We need to be better at women's lightweight, or we need to get rid of the division and just do showcase fights for Kayla, who's kind of the face of the company right now. We need to expand to 16 fighters per weight class if that's financially feasible for us. There's a lot of changes that will improve the Professional Fighters League. And you know what? I really trust that this league, it might not happen in season 3, but this league is going to continue to progress. They're going to make the changes to make it a better fighter format and a better fan-friendly format. And that's really all you can ask for, because we get these MMA companies that dig their heels in and they're so set in their ways and they'll never make a change. And that's just not good for anybody in the industry, fighters or fans or media or anyone else. So I'm glad to be part of the PFL because they're trying to move things forward.
All right.